Hello, everybody. Welcome. Today we have closed captioning and Spanish interpretation available, and we will have a land acknowledgement in a few seconds. But I wanted to open the floor first to our Spanish interpreter today, Hilda Bullón, to describe how to access translation services.
Buenos días a todas las personas hispanohablantes que están con nosotros hoy. Quería informarles que en algunos minutos voy a ser asignada como intérprete. Cuando eso suceda, ustedes van a ver la figura de un globo terrestre. Si ustedes pueden hacer un clic o teclear sobre el globo terrestre, les va a ofrecer la opción de escuchar toda esta presentación en español. Así que, por favor, estaré esperándolos. To all English speakers, just make an announcement that Spanish interpretation is available in this meeting today. And in a few minutes, you're going to see, also English speakers are going to see that there's going to be an icon that has a little globe underneath. If you click in there, you can choose between listening to all the presentations either in Spanish or in English. So for English speaker, because most of the presentation is going to be in English, you will hear directly from the presenter. But if somebody in the Spanish room is asking a question, then if you press English, you will hear my voice into English. So everything will be simultaneously interpreted. So, and throughout the meeting, I will be reminding people that interpretation services are available. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your beautiful meeting.
Thanks y gracias, Hilda. Next, we're going to hear a land acknowledgement from Ashley Miles.
Hi, I'm Ashley Miles. I'm the Vice President of NASO, Native American Student Organization. My pronouns are she and her, and I will be presenting land acknowledgement. Acknowledging that we reside in the homelands of Indigenous people is an important step in recognizing the history and the original stewards of this land. Land acknowledgements must extend far beyond words. The United States has worked hard to erase the narratives of Indigenous peoples over time. Land acknowledgement statements can help to remind us of history, the contributions, and the sacrifice Native people have made and continue to make. We honor and acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute nations. This area, specifically the confluence of the Platte and Cherry Creek rivers, was the epicenter for trade, information sharing, planning for the future, community, family, and ally building, as well as conducting healing ceremonies for over 45 Indigenous nations, including the Lakota, Kiowa, Comanche, Apache, Shoshone, Paiute, Zuni, and Hopi, among others. We recognize Indigenous people as the original inhabitants, stewards, and relatives of this land, as these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard. Remember the ties these nations still have to their traditional homelands. Let us acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory and pay our respects to the diverse Indigenous people still connected to this land. Let us also give thanks to all tribal nations and ancestors of this place. And I'd like to thank Gracie Richard Hine for providing this land acknowledgement, and thank you for inviting me here.
Thanks, Ashley. So welcome to our fourth social justice teach-in at CU Denver. Our topic today is Black Artivism. Our panelist speakers will be exploring how, as activists, creatives, and educators, Black expression is seen through the forms of freeing and liberating art. Our student facilitators who will be helping us field questions will be Natalia Walton, Suyan Moreno, and Jaswan Swanson. I am Nelia Viveros. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I currently serve in the role of interim VC for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you to CU Denver leadership for continuing to support this work. I wanted to again open today with a huge thank you to the incredible work of the people behind the scenes for making these teach-ins happen. You know who you are, but I want a special shout out to happen right now, if that's okay. So Sarah Anderson, thank you. James Speed, thank you. Lauren Fontana, thank you. Kat Angel, thank you. M. Alves, thank you. Faye Coronin, thank you. Theodosia Cook, thank you. Emily Osen, thank you. Soyan Bueno, thank you. Lisa Briggs, thank you. You all deserve a very special mention, and a special thank you to our esteemed panelists who are here today. Our student facilitators that I'm shortly going to introduce, Aja, who's going to be introducing those panelists. So just before I do that though, I'm going to introduce our community norms for the next few hours we're together. These norms will guide our discussions and carry us sort of through the time we're together today. I will lean into difficult conversations. I will believe everyone is doing their best. I will critique ideas, not people. I will use I statements. I will accept a lack of closure. I will not make assumptions about other people's identities, and I will take care of myself and take breaks if I need to. And last is I will agree that what is shared here stays here and what is learned here leaves here. Just a reminder that this is a full 2-hour session, so we don't have those breakout affinity groups that you were used to in the former social justice teach-ins. So the session today will run for about 2 hours. Our program is scheduled to run till about 1 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. And as a reminder, again, our session is being facilitated by 3 of our students, Natalia, Swian, and Jaswan. Our speakers will be introduced by our student, our CU Denver student, Aja Mejia. Aja is the Mixed Heritage Program Coordinator for the Center for Identity and Inclusion and President of the Multiracial Biracial Student Alliance, and identifies with the pronoun she, her, ella. Aja, I'm going to pass the mic over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Dr. Viveros. As Dr. Viveros said, my name is Aja Mejia, and I'll be introducing our panelists today. I'd like to start off by introducing Professor Wendy Greene, the daughter of American civil rights activists. Professor Doris Wendy Greene is a trailblazing anti-discrimination law scholar, teacher, and advocate who has devoted her professional life's work to advancing racial, color, and gender equity, in workplaces and beyond. The first African-American woman tenured law professor at Drexel University Thomas R. Kline School of Law, located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Professor Greene, through her legal scholarship and public advocacy, has generated historic civil rights protections for victims of discrimination in workplaces, schools, public accommodations, and housing. Teen Vogue, Now This News, and BBC World News have celebrated Professor Greene for her pioneering scholarly activism that combats grooming codes discrimination, and more specifically, the systematic discrimination African descendants suffer when donning natural hairstyles like afros, twists, braids, and locks. Between serving as a legal advisor and expert for civil rights cases challenging natural hair discrimination, co-drafting federal, state, and Crown Acts, testifying in support of this legislation throughout the country, and publishing seminal legal scholarship used by lawyers and lawmakers, Professor Greene's work has informed to date every legal pronouncement in the United States on municipal, state, and federal levels that natural hair discrimination is unlawful race discrimination. As one of the world's leading legal experts on this global civil rights issue, Professor Greene frequently provides legal commentary to international media outlets, such as the Washington Post and the BBC News. She is the author of a forthcoming book, #FreeTheHair, Locking Black Hair to Civil Rights Movements, under contract with the University of California, Berkeley Press. Next, I'd like to introduce Donna Mejia, who is the Associate Professor in the CU Boulder Theater and Dance Department. She's a choreographer, scholar, instructor, director, and performer specializing in critical race theory, pedagogy, contemporary dance, traditions of the African and Arab diaspora, and emerging fusion traditions in transnational electronica. Donna is a 2020-2021 faculty fellow for the CU Boulder Center for Teaching and Learning and the Renee Crown Wellness Institute. She's also an affiliate faculty member for the Women and Gender Studies and Ethnic Studies departments. Donna is also an authorized instructor of the Brazilian Silvestre modern dance technique and is lauded representative for this esoteric system after 30 years of practice. Donna completed her undergraduate degree in business administration at CU Boulder and received her first Master of Fine Arts degree on full fellowship from Smith College. She is the first professor of tribal/transnational fusion globally, having had a global impact on decolonization of the genre, establishing fair trade values and practices for the genre. She serves as the Director of Graduate Studies in Dance for CU Boulder and balances her time teaching, lecturing, touring throughout the United States and abroad. I'd like to introduce Katie Leonard, who is a Denver native and local community organizer for Equity and Justice. In 2017, she received her Bachelor's of Arts in African American Studies with a concentration in music and art history from Harvard College. She currently works at UCD College of Arts and Media as the activist in residence and special advisor to the dean. She holds a position on the university-wide strategic planning team, a consulting position on an upcoming 5 Points project with the Comcast Center, and delivers guest lectures and workshops at universities and other organizations across the country. Katie is also a co-facilitator for the City of Denver's Reimagining Policing and Public Safety Task Force and a co-chair of the ATMA Task Force to Dismantle Musical Racism. I'd like to move on to Eboni Coleman. A photographer, artist, creative, and entrepreneur, Eboni Coleman is a native from Denver, Colorado, with an education in public relations and advertising media and communications from the University of Northern Colorado. She has combined her talents and experiences to aid others in digital photography, creative services such as content creation and program planning and development, and business marketing regarding startup services. Given a natural touch to the eye and drawn to the ideology behind the importance of the arts and the need for curating creative expression and entrepreneurship, she decided to start EB Pixs as a Denver-based photography and media creative services company that focuses on capturing beauty behind and beyond the camera. With the overwhelming amount of negative imagery that was consistently being pushed out to the community, she felt it was imperative to have a photographic representation of the beauty, pride, and spirituality present in the intersectionalities of being Black, queer, and a woman. Amen. The same distinctive labels that are key factors of her own identity. Wanting to exhibit the energy of admiration while also featuring Black women because to her, we embody the spirituality of love. In the fall of 2020, she shared with the world her first photography series and gallery titled, Queer Faces of Color, to be a Black woman, to love a Black woman. Inspired by the 1991 film Daughters of the Dust, Queer Faces of Color, to be a Black woman, to love a Black woman, exhibits peace, pride, and spirituality, supporting the effort to be present in all spaces amongst other Black women as we discover the many facets of intimacy. Embarking on an ongoing photographic storytelling journey with the Queer Faces of Color series, which aims to embrace Black queer identity and culture, the first installation represents and more so embodies the L and LGBTQIA+, featured in Flourish Gallery, Outfront Magazine, Girl Boss Magazine, Voyage Denver, and Street Fashion Magazine. Eboni hopes to inspire other young entrepreneurs and artists, letting them know that anything is truly possible if you put your mind to it. No idea is too big. Last, but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Quinn Marchman, who is the co-founder, senior producer, and director of education with the Black Actors Guild, recently directing Idris Goodwin's award-winning play Hype Man. As a performer, he has worked with the Denver Center for the Performing Arts, including Shakespeare in the Parking Lot, Curious Theater's production of Skeleton Crew, and most recently, Rainbow Militia's COVID-conscious circus play, Celestial Chaos. Thank you for giving me the space to introduce these incredible people we're featuring today. I'd like to hand the mic over to our moderators for today, Suyan Moreno, Natalia Walton, and Jaswan Swanson. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be able to be part of this presentation and get to know you all a little bit better in regards to the work that you do and give back for our community, and also Black Expression. We'll be playing in 1998, Toni Morrison had an interview with Charlie Rose that pointed out the value of art and focusing on race. We're going to play a 2-minute snippet for context. Just give me one moment while I set this up.
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help.
My apologies.
Once asked you the question,
Can we see the screen okay?
once asked you the question, can you imagine writing a novel that's not centered?
My apologies, y'all. Let me go ahead and start the screen share once again.
About race. Then you said absolutely.
Yes.
Will you? No more years. Once asked you the question, can you imagine writing a novel that's not centered about race? And you said absolutely.
Yes.
Will you?
That's what he asked. I think, you see, I answered the question he didn't pose. You know, Tolstoy writes about race all the time. So does Zola, so does James Joyce. Now, if anybody can go up to an imaginary James Joyce and say, you write about race all the time, it's central in your novels, when are you going to write about what? Because you see, the person who asks that question doesn't understand that he or she is also racist. So to ask me when am I going to stop, or when, if I can, is to ask a question that, in a sense, is its own answer. Yes, I can write about white people. White people can write about Black people. Anything can happen in art. There are no boundaries there. Having to do it or having to prove that I can do it is what was embarrassing or insulting. In this book, I did.
It was insulting that people, help me understand. What was insulting? The idea that you felt like you had to prove that you could write without...
Yeah, the question was posed as though it were a desirable thing to do, to write about white people or to write not about race. That's what that means to me. And that it was a difficult thing to do, a higher level of artistic endeavor, or it was more important, and that I was still writing about marginal people, and why don't I come into the mainstream?
Aren't you importing too much into the question?
Maybe.
I think so.
Well, what else could it be, Charlie? What does that mean? What does that question mean? You tell me if I'm making too much.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I don't think it probably means, I didn't ask the question, so I don't think it probably means, but I don't think it had to
Thank you so much for your
about...
patience and the tech difficulties that often happen when we're on Zoom. I appreciate your patience. But in regards to this video, we wanted to highlight that this conversation was from 1998, yet it is still very relevant today. Part of this exchange highlights that all artists talk about race, yet when you sit down in front of white artists, they are never asked how race informs their work. Consider English departments in higher education. Their work is primarily based in white Western European work, yet they're never asked about race. They're never called me searchers. Now consider the juxtaposition of ethnic studies, for example, in our university. Rarely it is a department, and it's almost always they are asked to expand beyond and prove the value of their race in work. Today at CU Denver, ethnic studies is a program. Today, CU still grapples with valuing DEI practitioners as well. Can you please share as panelists your thoughts on the interview, as well as how race work, Black art is valued in higher education and broadly in our society? I'll also be posting the question in the chat.
I'd be happy to jump in and pass it to my colleagues here, but the question, of course, is insulting and is ages old, and can be flipped and reversed as to as it was in my career when I had my first evaluation as a tenure track professor, and I was there was one evaluator of my career looking at the entire trajectory of my full career that said, supposedly Donna Mejia is involved in critical race theory and feminism, but I certainly don't see it in her work. My classroom theory, my teaching, my articles, and my writing were about those topics, but they wanted me to also dance about them on stage. And I was very ferocious about saying the dance will be about whatever I want it to be about. And that came up when a certain orange-haired bully came into the presidency, and everyone was like making works about whatever was happening with this bully. And I was like, this fool does not deserve the inner sanctum of my work. My work will not be about Trump. I get to make work about whatever I want to make work about, and to have that, to say there are many beautiful people also making powerful statements about the political arena. Forgive me, but I'm going to continue to make work about the spiritual arena that is important to me. So I feel like the inability to inscribe meaning in a neutral zone to our work is something that follows us as artists. And at the same time, I'm not trying to eradicate my identity. I'm not trying to erase who I am, but I would like to also be free to create work that speaks to whatever my heart yearns for. And we haven't reached that place yet. Passing the baton.
Well, I'll be happy to jump in here.
I do apologize on, oh, go ahead.
No, go right ahead. Oh, okay. Well, I'll be happy to jump in here. And I think, what, Toni Morrison talks about, unfortunately, is something that is quite pervasive. I think regardless of what type of, sort of artistic endeavor that you may be a part of. I know on the legal academic side of things, definitely the advice, even early on, even as you're starting to, you're an aspiring law professor, is to not talk about race, to not write about race, to not teach about race. And I, to the earlier comment, to be able to have that freedom, to be able to write about, to think about, to express ourselves and talk about our personal experiences through the work, for me, has been the primary reason as to why I even wanted to be an academic. And that includes talking about my experience as a Black woman. as a Black American woman, and centering that in my work, and hopefully through that experience being able to advocate and advance some of the needs and the protections in terms of civil rights protections that are critical to not only Black women, but then can also be critical to other individuals who may not identify as such. And I think one of the things that we often, I can say in my experience, again, the idea is that if you talk about race, if you talk about Blackness in particular, a lot of individuals feel this not as, such as a rigorous or intellectual enterprise, but in fact, it is equally as rigorous as talking about, say, law and economics, devoid of conversations about marginalized peoples. And I will tell you, it's even more complicated probably than talking about law and economics, because it is involving such a sensitive topics of such of a sensitive nature. And then thirdly, I would say, in terms of that liberation, is that, as an academic who really centers all of my work around race and in particular Blackness, I will say it's very liberating. And what I'm doing is no different from anybody else. We all are, our work is, I think, largely shaped by, if not primarily shaped by our personal experiences. And so to the extent that, my work is being shaped by my personal experience as a Black woman, among other types of identity characteristics, it's no less valuable than anyone else's who likewise, their work is shaped by their experience.
I would love to jump in too, and just in response to Professor Mejia's comments and expression of how she was asked to sort of, from my understanding, make art and dance about what was going on. And I really appreciate the sentiment of like, I'm going to dance about what I want to dance about, right, and create art that they're centered perhaps around spirituality. Because I think a lot of what is lost in questions like the question that was asked of Toni Morrison and things that are asked of Black folks and Black women so often is that we're asked to speak on race, which is important and fantastic. But there is this idea too that we forget that the racial construct also includes whiteness, and we're not interrogating white people all the time about how their whiteness shapes their work. And Claudia Rankine speaks about this in The Racial Imaginary, which is a fantastic collection of essays about this idea from lots of scholars. But I think it's really important, and something that I've been trying to do at UCD and in all the work I do is, ask me to speak about Blackness and race theory and these things that now all of a sudden people seem to be valuing. Because when I graduated from college, even in 2017, people would sit down and say, oh, African American studies, like, what are you gonna do with that? And, after 45, it was like, people were inviting me to their wine nights to talk about race, right? And I'm saying, yeah, that's important. And we will do that work, and also interrogate whiteness. Why are we not asking these same questions? Whiteness so often, it's like white noise. We mistake it for silence, but it's not. The white imagination is not entirely individual, right? So I think tapping into that and talking about that and breaking that down is so important to Blacktivism as well. So.
And I just wanted to add, in short, like, in terms of creativity and storytelling, you choose like what is interesting, and most stories are rooted around conflict. And there's an inherent story in a Black creator, the conflict of Blackness in a white supremacist world. It's impossible to divorce that identity as a creator from the work that you're creating. And really, like, what is interesting, Toni Morrison used a couple of examples: an Irish writer of the early 1900s, a Russian writer. Like, the conflict, it would feel weird if those writers didn't speak to the conflict of the world that they were creating in, just as we can't avoid it either. So just from a storytelling standpoint, like, you choose what is interesting, like, and it is amazing to be Black. It is so exciting to be Black. It is challenging. Those stories, that element uplifts the story that I'm creating, even if it's not specifically about my Black experience.
I appreciate all of your contributions in regards to this question. And we really definitely dig right into the conversation without even doing an introduction in regards to the work that each one of you does. So my apologies on behalf of that. That's what happens when you try and do Zoom and talk at the same time. But before we move on to question 2, if I may please have a 5-minute introduction in regards to your work and in regards to, of course, your work and the presentation. And we can go ahead and start off with Quinn, please, Quinn Marchman.
Great, thank you. After hearing everyone's bios, I was getting that imposter syndrome. So I was like, oh, please let me get my slides so I can showcase myself a little bit more. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick and expand. I'm usually doing this for middle schoolers, and it's still a very self-conscious process. All right, so boom, hello everyone. My name is Kevin Quinn Marchman. He, him are my pronouns. And as co-founder and senior producer of the Black Actors Guild, this is been my labor of love for the past 10 years. This is my squad. Some of the people of our squad for our 2019 fundraiser Guildmas, which I just have to shout out COVID because we raised so much money that then we could not use to create dope productions in 2020. But these are the people who have sustained me and really given me the sense that, I can do this and create art in Denver, of all places, a city that I'm born in, that I love and am ambivalent about. Just wanted to share a couple of the projects that we've worked on in the last year or so. Are We Still Cool was a photo and essay project by my dear friend Christina Pitaluga that analyzed and explored and celebrated masculinity of POC men in different ways. And for me, it was just got to be beautiful with my homies. But really, it has been an exploration for the past several years of mine in trying to define masculinity in this new awakening and consciousness. We look at what the divine feminine is, the future is female, and really trying to negotiate what does it mean to be carry masculine energy in this world. How do we first acknowledge the harm that masculine energy and patriarchy has created, and then how do we help make a more equitable and beautiful future? And a lot of that starts with that interpersonal amongst men and male identifying individuals. So this was just a cool project that might still be up at Coffee at the Point in 5 Points, but that was a beautiful thing. A shout out to my dear friend Christina. Hype Man, I had the privilege of directing this show in August of 2020. We were one of the first theater productions to do live theater in the pandemic. We were safe. We ran 6 weeks, no positive cases at all, which was a challenge. We had sellout shows of 15 people some nights, and trying to do business in the midst of a pandemic was really hard, but you find the things that are worth it. And Hype Man, Idris Goodwin, he's the director of the Fine Arts Center in Colorado College. He is my OG. And this place speaks about how to be an artist and also hold up a cause, and the balance between sharing your voice and pissing off sponsors and the financiers. And white allyship, what that looks like, how you have to challenge your white friends in places to step up and use their whiteness as a vector of good, and the dynamics of especially hip hop and misogyny and those dynamics. So this was a fun project. We got to philosophize about things, and I got to see my friends for the first time in 6 months. I am currently working with the Early Relationship Abuse Prevention Program in New York City. I'll actually be moving in about a month here to actually head out to the city to do the work. And this was a job that popped up surprisingly, but it has been amazing to talk with young people about the dynamics of relationships and healthy relationships, communication, personal boundaries. So I'm usually up at 6 o'clock talking to kids in Harlem about that through Zoom. And they recently said like, oh, Quinn, you're cool and funny in a kind of cringy way. So I'm still connected to the youth, even from afar. And boom, real quick, I just wanted to shout out Rainbow Militia. They are a circus troupe that I'm doing a show with now. We have, I think, all of our social media info listed in this. So I have to do a completely shameless plug. We're putting that show up in 3 weeks at Exdo. So if you're interested in seeing COVID conscious, COVID safe circus weirdness, that's what I'm doing. And then lastly, it is my mama's birthday today. So just a shout out to Desiree Davis Marchman, the beautiful queen. I thank her for all the things, and I'm excited to pass it to Professor Greene at this point.
Well, I know I can't follow up mom's birthday, so so I'm going to do my very best here. Let's see here. Can you all see the PowerPoint? Okay, wonderful. So I do not be scared by the number of slides. I will not go through all of those. But again, so the work that I do is really being able to really connect the experience of African descendants and the discrimination that we suffer on the basis of various characteristics, including our hair, to human rights and civil rights activism. And as I mentioned before, for me, the work that I'm doing is deeply personal, and it started, I'll have to say, at least the inspiration for it was when I was 5 years old and learning about Brown versus Board of Education, in particular Thurgood Marshall's role in trying to eliminate Jim Crow root and branch. And this is one of the questions that Justice Marshall asked before the Supreme Court when he was arguing this case. Why, of all of the multitudinous groups of people in this country, do you have to single out Negroes and give them this separate treatment? And at 5 years old, learning about this case and also my parents' civil rights activism to try to dismantle Jim Crow in my hometown of Columbia, South Carolina, I too was perplexed and asked the question, not in such big words, but really wanted to know, A, what is this thing called race? Who thought of it? And in particular, why was it that it appeared that African descendants, not only in the United States, but around the world, were the target for inferior treatment and subordination and subjugation and exclusion? And so what my work does in terms of my publications, as well as through my teaching, is that first I do interrogate, what is race? What is this social and political and legal construction? How are we, what are the kind of experimental dimensions of racial identity and racial classification? And how do our understandings of race shape legal doctrine, legislation, and policy? And what I have found is, much of the work that I'm doing is very much linking our past to our present, especially as it relates to combating race-based natural hair discrimination. Many of you are probably very much aware of the fact that independent of our skin color, also our hair texture has served as a basis of our racial identity and therefore forms of racial discrimination. And so over the years, for almost 15 years now, I have developed a body of legal scholarship known as Grooming Codes Discrimination. And really what I'm trying to illuminate in this work is that grooming codes discrimination, or the enactment and enforcement of appearance and grooming mandates or expectations, which we oftentimes believe are very harmless, are in fact very harmful. And they really can infringe upon our personhood, infringe upon our freedom of expression as it relates to our racial and culture and gender identities, among other types of identity classifications. And they really, they can infringe upon not only those things, but result in discrimination and inequity in workplaces and other spaces. So I have written a number of works, which I can talk about later, but largely the primary, the central sort of meat to the work is about advancing that natural hair discrimination that African descendants systematically suffer in workplaces, in schools, and housing and public accommodations, and in broader society, really is race discrimination that our civil rights laws should be protecting against. And so the scholarship and the public engagement around the world has resulted in the Free the Hair mission, or hashtag Free the Hair mission, or campaign or movement. And basically it raises public awareness around the systematic and global discrimination that African descendants suffer because of our natural hairstyles and hair textures like afros, braids, twists, and locks. And the ultimate goal of this work is to secure legal, social, policy, as well as personal change, so that African descendants can freely rock our natural hair or freely wear our hair according to our personal needs and desires. And much of the work has been, as already mentioned, in addition to really raising public awareness, is also being involved in litigation, challenging race-based natural hair discrimination and grooming codes that regulate our natural hair, such as the case that the LDF brought on behalf of Caden Bradford and his cousin DeAndre Arnold, many of you might be aware of, as well as providing friend of court briefs or amicus briefs for other groundbreaking litigation like the EEOC versus Catastrophe Management Solutions that really served as an impetus. And then also in the work really describing what is race in a way that can be hopefully used in civil rights legislation, as well as in legal decision making, and also just in broader society as we think about, what is race and racial discrimination. And that definition that I proposed in a publication, what's Title VII, what's hair and other race-based characteristics got to do with it, has ultimately been adopted in what is known as the Crown Acts. And additionally, the work has informed this legislation that has now been passed in 7 states and among several municipalities. And here, and just recently passed by the United States House of Representatives. And again, I'm having the opportunity to serve as not only an advisor in litigation, but also helping to draft and advise in legislation like the Federal Crown Act, that if passed, hopefully if passed, it would basically protect not only just race-based natural hair discrimination, but really clarifies that discrimination on the basis of characteristics commonly associated with race and national origin. That kind of discrimination would violate our federal civil rights laws. So that is what I do. And ultimately in this work is to really bring about the opportunity, really hopefully is to free the hair for everyone, not just African descendants, but all individuals who are suffering race-based discrimination on the basis of their hair and other types of mutable characteristics.
Thank you very much, Dr. Greene. I think I'm supposed to go next. Hello, everyone. I'm Donna Mejia, and I'm a professor at CU Boulder. And my first point of information is always my Creole identity, my multi-heritage identity, and the fact that I have 2 parents that are also Creole. And so people always say, which parent is white, which one is Black? I'm like, neither. They're both like me. And it goes back like that for as long as we could figure out. And so my personal identity exploration led me into the world of African arts. And so what was originally a business degree and just lots of recreational time in the dance world turned into a profession at some point. And I was unprepared for where that journey would take me initially. Just in short, I was with a professional West African dance company for about 12 years. And as we were getting ready to retire the company because our beautiful director, you may know her, one of our regional heroes, Letitia Williams, as she was approaching retirement age, she was like, we're gonna let it go. We're not gonna bring another director. Let's just go ahead and enjoy this last chapter. And one of our last dances was moving towards the dances of Morocco. And I was absolutely smitten. I felt the most astonishing homecoming going into the dances of North Africa. And so I devoted the rest of my career to learning about both the secular, the sacred, the transcendental, and just folk dances of the North African region. And I realized after a time that I had so much more freedom personally in the community at the time, because in the West African dance community, I was always bumping up against not being brown enough visually to be cast in different works. And as well, at the time, there was extensive patriarchy and misogyny. And so I felt tokenized frequently by male teachers who were like, come to my hotel room, I give you solo. And I'm like, I don't think so. So long story short is, as I dove into the world of solo performance in Arabic and North African forms, I discovered the voices of women speaking in new ways. And I was personally completely found myself at home. As things continued, I went to the East Coast and ended up doing a solo for a concert at University of Massachusetts as a guest in their show. And that concert solo was bootlegged to YouTube, which was only 4 months old at the time. That YouTube ended up going viral. And so I, the week after the work was on stage, I ended up getting letters from Brazil and Russia and England and Australia and Sudan and Egypt and from all over the world, with people saying, interesting fusion, really resonated, but who have you studied with and how did you make your editorial choices? And I was completely unprepared for it. I had been studying dances of the world, including Mexico, South America, the entire African diaspora, all of the African continent for over 20 years, but I was personally unprepared at the time to talk about fusion as a methodology. And so that took me on the path of really looking at what does multi-heritage look like? What does the management of overlapping identities look like? How do we make collective corporeal body decisions about what we maintain as a people? Where do we let go of cultural practices that feel they don't serve? And so that journey went into the transcultural fusion dance community for me. And so that's where I've been living ever since, and really enjoying things on a global conversation. Really, our transcultural fusion dance community was the first to start using platforms like YouTube to develop new aesthetics. And I really started identifying that we were using those exchanges not to blast through or defame sacred cultural material, but instead, for the first time, to say we had the largest library of cultural information in the history of the planet, the internet. And what were we doing with that information as we encountered each other? How did we workshop our identities? How did we reconfigure our identities? What aspects of that reconfiguration were problematic? And in what ways were we workshopping completely new ways of moving, expressing, and what were the value systems and the cultural signifiers behind those new practices? And so this has been an amazing journey with conversations with DJs, dancers, and practitioners from all over the globe. And within the last year, we've changed the title of the genre. We've changed practices. We have workshopped what we think of as fair trade cultural exchange. We're going to have our next colloquium discussion day on the topic on Saturday, February the 27th. I will be sure to drop that link in the chat. It's called Gathering at the Delta. And it's a world colloquium for transcultural fusion dance. And those people who are interested in deliberately playing around with and workshopping and experimenting with common denominators between various cultures in an embodied way. How do we dialogue cultural difference through our bodies? And for me, it's an ongoing conversation, maybe selfishly, with my own identity, with understanding how cultural collisions are reconciled within my lifetime, within myself, within my heart, and how they can do so in the world at large. And so I would invite you to learn more or see more, see the dancing and read more at donnainthedance.com. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it to my esteemed panelist colleague, Katie Leonard.
Thank you so much, Professor Mejia. I'm going to share my screen really fast. So, as you perhaps picked up in my bio, I wear a lot of hats at this point in my life, and I like it that way. Honestly, I like shoes better, but hats are what have been given to me, so I'm rocking with it. I'm going to take a little bit of time here just to break down a couple of the ways that I spend my time every day. So first and foremost, I'm from here, from Denver. I'm a Denver native, and this city, as it has continued to grow, the local government and different organizations and businesses have honestly continued to commit some gross human rights violations and bolster injustices in housing, employment, health, education, et cetera, et cetera. There's also a lot of great things that have come with Denver growing, but I am unafraid to say these things boldly and loudly, that there is also a lot of discrimination and oppression that is happening in the city right now. And I say it shamelessly. And for that reason, people like to sort of accuse me and a lot of like activist folks of like hating Denver. But the plain and simple truth is that I love this place too much not to demand a just, equitable, human-centric community. I love this land, people, the indigenous people, too much to not to boldly imagine a decolonized, anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-patriarchal future for us. I am an abolitionist, a pleasure activist, and a practitioner of transformative justice in our community here. Just to go over a few of what that means. Abolition is a vision with the goal of eliminating imprisonment, policing, and surveillance, and creating lasting alternatives to punishment and imprisonment. Abolition is intimately interested in community and future building, in an unapologetically and radically reimagining more than just tomorrow, but what does the world look like, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years down the road. And contrary to some popular narratives, abolition is not about absence, it's about presence. Abolition is about building life-affirming institution. I'm also a pleasure activist, and that's the work we do to reclaim our whole happy and satisfiable selves from the impacts and delusions and limitations of oppression and or supremacy. Ultimately, pleasure activism is us together learning to make justice and liberation, to make the movements that we're in the most pleasurable experiences we can have here on this planet. And then broadly speaking, transformative justice is community healing, healing in a way that puts us in right relationship with one another and teaches us how to be in conflict. Because that's an inevitable aspect of life. We're always going to be in conflict, but how do we reduce harm? How do we transform harm in a way that makes future harm impossible? My position at CU Denver is extremely unique and varied, but the core of my work here is leading the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force at the College of Arts and Media. And the order of these words is different, you might notice, from the conventional buzzword that is DEI, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. I just want to highlight that this order of the letters at the College of Arts and Media is extremely important, EDI, to our work there, and to all the organizing work that I do. Diversity, quite literally difference, and inclusion, the act of including, are both important words, but they're much more important when they come after equity. Equity identifies unequal footing, unbalanced conditions, and builds systems to perpetuate just outcomes. This doesn't always mean providing the same things to everyone, which sometimes happens when we look at equality. Equity is really important. It's not forcing people to assimilate, right? So all of the work that Wendy Greene does is equity work, right? It's changing systems. It's anti-assimilationist. Equity is truly valuing differences and building systems that reflect that. And the last hat that I'll mention here is that I'm a thinker. I've been lucky enough to speak and lecture and offer workshops in different ways of engaging. I facilitate as well to folks at universities and other organizations about various different topics. And perhaps my favorite idea to engage with is how social justice is at its core an imagination battle. As an activist and organizer, I am often asked, the question like, how on earth are you going to do that? Almost as if uncharted territory is a brick wall, right? A barrier to progress. How on earth are you going to do that? But I see it as fertile ground for the imagination. Why is it that we can so clearly envision the end of the world, but envisioning a more equitable future seems like an impossible task, right? I'll say it again, social justice is at its core an imagination battle. And all organizing, all activism is science fiction, right? Back in the early 1900s, the idea of a self-driving car and a Black president, or even Black folks who were seen as fully human, was a science fictional idea, right? So we have to be bold in our imagining forward. And I argue that art and the arts are portals that have and will allow us to access new worlds and new futures. So I talk a lot about science fiction. This art here is by my good friend and local artist, Daley Johnson, and I'm really excited for the conversation today. I'm going to pass it now to Eboni. Let's see, how can I start?
Beautiful. Hello, everyone. My name is Eboni Coleman. I am the lead photographer and business owner of EB Pixs, also the curator of Queer Faces of Color, To Be a Black Woman, to Love a Black Woman. Let me just share my screen with you guys 1 second. And I do have a video for you guys today. Hold on here. Okay, can you guys see that? Good, okay. Let's go to present. Okay. All righty. So kind of what I wanted to talk to you guys about today was my first installation that I kind of put together, which was called Queer Faces of Color, To Be a Black Woman, to Love a Black Woman. And just to give you a little info. There we go. Okay. EB Pixs brings to you the Queer Faces of Color series, To Be a Black Woman, to Love a Black Woman, inspired by the 1991 film Daughters of the Dust. Queer Faces of Color, To Be a Black Woman, to Love a Black Woman exhibits the peace, pride, and spirituality, supporting the effort to be present in all spaces amongst other Black women as we discover the many facets of intimacy. And a big thing that I really want to touch on is, what do you think about when you first think about intimacy? Intimacy can look and can be more so depicted in so many different ways. But I feel like as just humans, we kind of go to that physical analogy of more so what intimacy means. And so I really, really wanted to touch on a side that I felt like just wasn't really seen in the community, especially within this past year of so much negative imagery that I felt my community was just receiving. And so I have a little short video for you guys just to kind of show you the making of the project. This video was created by my assistant director, Aja A. I'm so thankful for her. And here we go.
You love me when I turn away. You grab me when I can't be helped. These lessons that you show me, loving you is loving me. Peace is what I've come to understand.
I hate that photographers bring models together and they aren't accommodating to them, especially the Black ones. You have to have things laid out differently. You have to come with a different type of respect and appreciation.
Me be me all the time, and suddenly I see, remembering that we've come too far. We must take the time to heal. Take the time to heal.
To where And so if you
take the time to heal. Take the time to.
I got 2 shave heads, a wrap, and some dreads. It's like the ultimate package. Ultimate package.
Your unconditional love touches me in ways I've never felt before. Your ability to see past your emotions in order to hear me. It was a reminder to self that there are individuals out there that know love, that know hope. This interconnectedness we share reflects the magicianship of the Black woman. Our power and intimacy allows us to be the super beings we are. I feel you. I see you.
Black rainbow heaven.
You are me.
Black gay heaven. Like, oh, it's about to be Beyonce. I'm about to have y'all all in a tree.
Yes. Okay, so there is, just wanted to share that with you guys. Going back to this presentation. Okay, so I also just want to share a few of the images with you and kind of my idea behind the concept. When I first watched the movie, I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen Daughters of the Dust, but it definitely explores the traditions of the Gullah tribe and really kind of goes into Yoruba traditions. And I felt like I'm really about bringing in light and joy and not necessarily focusing on the traumatic experience, especially within the Black community, especially in regards to Black women. I really wanted to depict a scenery of love and light. And so tying that into queer identity, I wanted to do peekaboo more so symbols of that. So that's why they have the rainbow lip. They have a very like clear lid and their skin is also just very, very clean. I was very intentional with picking my models. I thought it was imperative to also feature dark skin models because not only do I myself identify as a dark skin female, but also being in the industry and working in the media, I felt like the dark skin narrative is very kind of augmented, and I just want to show it in beauty and light in a queer way. And so that's why I kind of went on the way that I went. And I also do have an upcoming series coming up. It's called Queer Faces of Color, We Believe in God Too. It is actually going to be featured in Colorado and Atlanta this year. And just to kind of go over the description for that, it reads, and in our love, we found the one thing that tied our spirits together, and that was our love for God. Depicting the truths of many untold souls, the Queer Faces of Color series presents to you We Believe in God Too, exploring the intersectionalities between queerness, love, religion, and faith in the embodiment of Black culture and identity. And I don't want to talk about that too much because it's up and coming, and I really just kind of want people to be surprised. But that is a little about me and my story and what I'm kind of offering to the world in my art form. Okay.
Phenomenal. thank you all for your in-depth responses at this time. I would like to ask you all our second question we'd like to give you, and that is, how can leadership in higher education and outside take responsibility for valuing art and work in general about BIPOC people as much as we do art and work about Western European culture? And I'll pass it off to Kevin to start us off, please.
Sure, thank you. Well, I mean, this is a great first start. I think like easy enough to make like a cool graphic saying, "Yeah, we're celebrating Black History Month. Come to something in the UC and it's a one-day thing." But like bringing people in from the community, creating the dialogue, compensating people for their time and talents. And like, and forgive me because there's 3 professors here as well, but add a little spice into the conversation, is realize that like universities are institutions created through white supremacy, and that there's a lot of people in the art community who ain't checking for what universities are doing. So just understand, like, there is a lane for you. You have to do the work to build that lane, but realize that you are never going to be the full nexus point for what the culture is doing. We just don't need you. Anyways, so I'll say that much to say, understand it, build the infrastructure, invite the people, commit to the value, and really realize that just like in the ways of research, you have to understand that it's always going to be happening on the periphery. Like by the time that it comes to the school, some of it is kind of played out at this point because there's new things being created. So yeah, just find your lane and then give people the keys to be in the driver's seat.
Oh, Katie, did you want to go? I guess trying to just to piggyback off of Quinn, I guess I kind of have a different perspective. I guess I kind of want to start on what exactly is value. And so, although I don't want to take away from like Black and Indigenous people of color art and culture, and the intention behind the subject being needed to be its own entity, I think it starts just with that, by making our community's art and history a part of the normal curriculum and not just having moments that are more so highlighted, if that makes sense more so. To me, it's been a norm to learn about Western European culture and an elective to learn about Black and Indigenous people of color art and culture. And so I guess I ask everyone, and also my fellow panelists, like, why is that? Why is it that we are here and have played and continue to play a major role in building this world, but we lack the main component in what the normal is? And so, yes.
I'd love to jump in here too, because that's a lot of the work that I've come in as like a community member, no ties to UCD, right? And saying like, how can we make changes, lasting changes? How can we move into action and not just be talking about these things, right? And one of the biggest things, like you said, is curriculum. Curriculum needs to be overhauled, right? There's no reason that I should have, like I entered the College of Arts and Media and I had professors everywhere, from everything to sculpture to like visual arts to dance, asking me like, how can I change my curriculum? Like I'm starting to see, and I know that I don't even see some of the things that are so Eurocentric, right? But there are a lot of barriers in that sense. So why hasn't it happened? Because a lot of times harm isn't being caused because people want to be like perpetuating harm. That is like professors who are teaching maybe like very Eurocentric curriculums. They're under-resourced as well. So it's like they don't have time or the resources in a lot of ways to go through and overhaul their curriculum, right? And then also if one professor does it, cool. But then how do we do it at a department level? And then how do we do it at a unit level? And how do we do it at a college level, right? So it needs to be a commitment from my perspective, from colleges to say, we are going to go through and we're going to find ways to center Blackness and indigeneity and Latino code, make this an actual global education, right? And center those and like not make them electives or silo them, right? And which inevitably ends up, you know, it being an elective. So that's abolitionist thinking at an institutional level, and you need a commitment from departments like in curriculum. And hopefully people are starting to move into that, but the reality of it is like, it's not the easy thing to do. It's the right thing to do, but it's not easy, right? Because you have to resource your professors. Also, like I'll just say it, at a lot of the colleges at UCD, especially at the College of Arts and Media, like 70% of our lecturers who bring the diversity, right, are a lot of times, as Kevin said, like people from the community can come in and lecture, but we pay them significantly less, which makes no sense, right? That's blatant racism and white supremacy, right? So then it's a question of like, how do we pay them more? And the reality is like, if we have a pot of money and a lot of money is going to like tenured track professors, which I'm sure Professor Mejia can speak to, like that happens to be a very, you know, white male thing, being a tenured track professor, that there's going to be, if equity has to happen in pay, some people are going to be paid less. It's like it's going to have to even out, right? So it's finding ways to do that. And I say the third piece would be like hiring practices. So a lot of people say, oh, we're looking for diverse faculty, but it's not reflected in faculty searches in any way, other than like, there's this sort of like behind the scenes, like, oh, we're gonna get a brown person or a person who looks a certain way. However, it's really important that we don't just have like representation in like visuality, right? But what do you study? Do you have a background in queer studies, in you know, race theory, in indigenous study? Like, do you have a background in teaching these things and implementing those in your curriculum? So one way that can be done is through cluster hires, where you are going to hire a bunch of faculty, right? And in your description, it specifies we need an anti-racist background. So there are lots of ways to do it. And it can be done. It's just not the easy thing to do in a lot of ways. And then I would just echo and like snap to what Kevin said, and that also recognizing that like we aren't in institutions, right? We should not be the center. There's so many paywalls to like learning and knowledge that shouldn't exist. Like, how as a university can you transform the way that you occupy space? Oftentimes, like in the Aurora campus, like space that was previously owned and stewarded by Indigenous people in a way that is less supremacist, right? How do you remove paywalls and provide access to knowledge to the community, and also learn from your community? So I'd say that would be my 10 cents.
I would be excited to contribute to this one, mainly because I'm going to surprise you all in saying CU Boulder Theater and Dance decolonized 18 years ago. We decolonized our curriculum. We decolonized the faculty. And at least on the dance side, I'm representing the dance side of our department. Of the 8 full-time faculty that operate in this unit, 5 of us are African descended. And so we are technically a predominantly Black department. And that always surprises our students, because we get many European American descended students that come from rural dance traditions or rural competitive studios, and they come to class at CU Boulder, and for the first time, we don't say ballet is required. We don't even say modern dance is required. We flip it entirely and we say, okay, you're going to take 10 a.m. technique, and that 10 a.m. class is where all the dance majors get together Monday through Friday, and you're going to have a rotating menu. Sometimes it's going to be house, sometimes it's going to be aerial, sometimes it's going to be transcultural fusion dance, which is predominantly going to be Arabic and Lebanese and Egyptian dance. Other times you're going to have floor work from an artist from Mexico. You know, we just keep mixing it up. And so that work was started by Onye Ozuzu 18 years ago. But what had to happen was the alliance of allies. We would not have been able to build it on the back of one person. That is an unreasonable burden. So what we did is asked our white colleagues to get educated, and they did. That was shocking. I think even now I'm benefiting from the work that was done then, because I wasn't with the faculty at that point. But we have white colleagues that can speak to these issues, can speak informatively. And it's still healing for me on a daily basis to be in a meeting when it doesn't come necessarily first from my mouth that there's a problem in front of us that points to supremacy. The white colleague leans in and says, you know what? We need to change the title of this course because this keeps pointing back to Eurocentricity, and I'm not okay with that. And I'm just like, where am I? What's happening? And it gives me joy and it fuels my work. But I do want to say that we did learn, and I don't know that we're supposed to know this, but we did learn that the dance department was the lowest paid faculty range in the entire university. And being that it is dominantly women who fill the field, that also means that there is disparity in gender and disparity by field. And so compared to like the starting salary of a professor in economics, which would be around $70,000 to $90,000 at the time, dance was $60,000 a year for a faculty salary. And we were just like, stop right there. That's why the Equal Pay Act that was just put forth in Colorado will be so important, and why universities are scrambling to try and make sure it is implemented fairly by fall in the middle of the land of COVID with all kinds of budget cuts and restrictions. The next thing to make the arts equitable in higher education is to really look at the tenure evaluation standards. And so that means when a professor is evaluated for long-term career, let's see, how do I describe this? Tenure means that someone has been evaluated by their peers and they have been voted to have made a lasting contribution to their field of study, so much so that the university is willing to protect their position. That's what tenure means. It means they anticipate your productivity in this field of study will contribute in a lasting way and has been significant. Long story short is many times artists have a hard time being evaluated by professors from other disciplines. I myself had to have evaluators from other disciplines because I was the first professor of transcultural fusion dance globally. I didn't have peers to evaluate my work. So I had English professors and physicists and education professors and critical race theory professors all trying to evaluate what I did in order to say whether or not they felt it was a lasting contribution. And so I think that means we have to open up the standards to include emerging fields of practice. We also have to open up the evaluation standards so that new venues, unconventional venues, other than red carpet, velvet seat theaters are important to us, that we look at site-specific work, that we look at unconventional scenarios, that we look at community building work, that we look at community collaborative work as being equally important to those red carpet venues that are all about name dropping. So I know that in my own tenure file, I could have a performance at a hotel convention center that would have 500 people in the audience, but because it was at a Hilton hotel, it didn't count as much as it would if it were at the Kennedy Center in Washington, DC, right? Where maybe 10 or 15 people wander by and stop to look at the performance because of that whole name dropping and that Eurocentric hierarchy. The next thing, sorry, I'm trying to go fast so I can make room for other panelists. Decolonize the curriculum. Our students, when they come to our department, the first course that they take is dance and cultural perception and expression. And it is an effort to blatantly break down their assumptions about cultural centricity of European ways. I teach that course myself, and we start with assumptions. It's an assumption index right off the start to look at how we were taught about dance, what meaning is coded into a moving body, what kind of assumptions do we make about the identities of those moving bodies? How can dance be read as a text for cultural meaning in the same way that if you were to archaeologically dig up an artifact and look at an ancient text and try to see what it tells you about the people, what it tells you about their values, how can we use the moving body to read the same thing? It's not as ambiguous as it may seem. And we have to fight against the perception that the arts are not a viable career and that the only thing we should be supporting curricularly are things that are commercially viable. The truth is, those who can make a new path or distinguish themselves or create something fresh and new frequently need to break off of the beaten path to get it done. And so if that's the case, it means that if all we're doing is creating cookie cutter artists that just keep reproducing the same thing we've seen before, we're not evolving. And so I think the institutions are so worried about the name dropping and the prestige, and to let that go and to say, no, wait a minute, who's actually bringing new voice to the table? Who is actually creating a new vision for themselves? Who is really being inclusive about what they're doing and to make room for those voices at the table? In terms of open source materials, yes to that. I just wanted to say thank you very much for mentioning that. If you happen to visit my own website, donnainthedance.com, you'll see that there's a resource tab. And on that page, I publish all of the texts that I teach from in all of my classes and frequently many of the articles. Because in my own touring engagements, I've had so many people walk up to me and tearfully say, I love dance. I wish I could have made it my career. I wish I could have done this for a living, but I had to do such and such instead. And so those economic choices where someone is forced to prioritize something that they perceive as more practical means they turn their back on their heart's love for the arts. And so I'm like, if you've got the gumption, here's everything. Go find it. And every once in a while, let's have a little cafe session where we get together and talk about it as a community, because I do not believe that knowledge should be behind a paywall. I'm very much a fan of open source materials. The last thing I want to say, and I promise this is the last, is that harm, at least in my career, at some points was coming from colleagues that I had to ideologically battle with for what I did, not at CU Boulder, and it surprised me. So I want to give credit where credit's due. I have colleagues that I have never felt I had to battle with, that what I do does not require validation with my colleagues, has always been supported and celebrated. I'm very rare, and I would like to change that. I would like to see that kind of support for more people. Most of the harm I have endured as a professor in the CU system, believe it or not, has come from students who come into the classroom and are like, well, I need my ballet and my jazz, and this isn't really contributing to my career because I have an audition on Wednesday and I need to skip your class today so I can go get my ballet practice in. So I hope that's okay. And I'm like, no, it's not okay. And I'm actually working with micro contortionism in your torso that needs to be worked out so you can actually hold your ballet leg with a little more steadiness than what you're doing right now. So you need to go stay in this class today, go get your yoga mat, and here we go. It's about changing reference points for virtuosity and expanding our definition of what we think of as virtuosity in a moving body, to start to see with nuance and with poetry what Black and brown voices have brought to the aesthetic of movement. And I need to hush up. Thank you, colleagues, for giving me so much time.
Yeah, no, that was wonderful. I'm taking notes, as Kevin and I have already said. And also just, I really, so many things that you all mentioned already, I'm not going to reiterate, but I think in terms of going back, I think it's really important in talking about, opening up our minds when we talk about decolonization and doing things that are different, is really opening up our minds and imagining something different. That an individual who comes into the space need not be just like me. And oftentimes when we are hiring and we are promoting and advancing individuals, we are very much doing that from a me place, as opposed to thinking about sort of the broader and positive impact that a person is having, whether it be in the institution or beyond. So I think it's really important when we are evaluating individuals, even for those of us who are, who are awakened, right? And who are committed to inclusivity and belonging and equity, that we have to be very mindful of our own conscious and unconscious biases. And additionally, not trying to only promote those individuals that may be doing the same things that I am doing, right? Or possibly the things that I enjoy and like and so in value, right? So we have to check our own selves, I think, in this process, and not think only about these other individuals. We're part of this institution and this organization. And to that point, one thing I've been thinking a lot about, especially as it relates to students and student evaluations of different professors, and especially professors of color, because I know that I do things differently, than probably many of my other colleagues, just by virtue of even broaching the subject and doing so, broaching the subject of race, and race and gender and class and color and religion and all of these things, pretty head on, not only in my teaching, but also in my scholarship in public engagement. And what I really think that is important, and this is across the board, is that, we have to remind ourselves that difference is not deficiency. Difference is not deficiency, and it should not be devalued and therefore excluded. And I just say that because I think oftentimes when we are evaluating individuals, we think because they're doing something different, that we then think that there is something wrong with that difference, and that it is deficient and it's not as valuable as what is sort of the mainstream of what we so-called normally do. And that goes back to not having, possibly a standard, or you have to have standards, but not normalizing certain things. In hiring, I would say, one thing, I think it's, we oftentimes, when we are trying to bring in these perspectives as it relates to race and culture and just non-whiteness, we sort of go to people of color to be able to bring that to the institution. And I think it's really important in terms of not only hiring, but also when we are reviewing individuals for promotion and ultimately tenure, that we also have to pose and expect the same things of our white candidates or those who would not consider themselves people of color. So even in the hiring process, not even just trying to gauge their commitment, but being very express about and asking, what is your commitment, right, to racial inclusion, gender inclusion, and equity and belonging, and not just putting that on the shoulders of people of color, but also to Professor Mejia's point about expecting that of our white colleagues as well. And how you do that is by asking very early on in the hiring process. And if they can't speak to it's not just about diversity. If they can't speak to their commitment as it relates to inclusion and belonging in the full sense, then if we're talking about institutionalization of inclusion and belonging, then that's not a qualified candidate, so there's that. And so my third point to that is about really expanding our notions of what is qualified, right? And what is competency and what is valuable, and really trying to take a look at our elitist ways in terms of determining what is qualified and what is competent. And I say that, from the lens of a person who is in legal academia, and I see this all the time, about if you don't come from a top top ranked school, if you didn't clerk for Justice Scalia, if you didn't do all of these things, right, in again, a very short period of time, because they only give us so much time of a window, then you're not somehow qualified to teach these students, right? And everybody's looking for this person who's triple Harvard and Yale, and I'm not knocking those institutions. I think they're wonderful. But I think, you know, in light of even our political context right now in terms of the value of HBCUs, and I have to say, I am a graduate of an HBCU and a HBCU legacy, that, you know, even with that, and then this is not just in terms of my white colleagues, but even my non-white colleagues who do not value, and I will say, who do not value even me being in the profession or the work, because I did not come from, you know, maybe some of those more elite institutions. So I say for all of us, we have to check ourselves, right? In terms of even it sort of reinforcing elitist ideas of who is competent, who belongs, who is qualified, and where we find ourselves saying, oh yes, they're triple Yale or Harvard or whatever, and therefore, yes, let's move them up in terms of, especially with hiring, and hiring is very key, but really, you know, looking what, I mean, truly at the heart of it, do they bring the things and those, you know, not the things, their scholarship, their interest, their background, their experiences that really do effectuate our commitment to belonging and inclusion and diversity and equity. Because if not, then again, they are not qualified and competent if we are really trying to bring about the institutionalization of all of these values. So I think that goes back to the earlier point that Eboni was making, you know, about the definition of value, right? And so how do we define that? Is it just about where you went to school and to Professor Mejia's point, where I might be dancing, you know, the particular venues? Is that what we value, or is it the beautiful and the impact, right? Even if it's just one person, that positive impact that person can make in the work that they're doing, and therefore be able to be a part of a community that is truly cultivating, again, those things that we are valuing.
Thank you so much for your amazing contributions to that question, everyone. I think we really circled back in regards to the work that you all do and how we can go ahead and have accountability and responsibility for our universities, and really pushing for this DEI work and having them walk the talk. In reference to your own personal work, and I will go ahead and keep this for 1 minute for each participant, how is your work rooted in intersectional justice and diasporic justice? I know we've touched on it a little bit when you were presenting your work, but I would love to have a more in-depth look for your intersectional and diasporic justice.
I can definitely start with that. I feel like my work is more so intersectional by combining the Black identity with the queer perspective and telling that story through the art form of photography. I feel like that in itself, to me, is a representation of justice just by doing the act. And diasporic in the sense of how Black people were ripped of their spiritual upbringings and forced to recreate and mold. And the symbolism that is tied to that, I add those components as details to the story that you see in my work.
Okay, I'll just say really quickly, in terms of my scholarship and advocacy as it relates to grooming codes discrimination, I really do take a very critical look at the ways in which appearance and grooming norms and expectations and mandates implicate, you know, a number of different identity characteristics, like not just simply about race in terms of Blackness, but also race and gender, color, as well as class. And so that is one way in which, the work is very much intersectional. And just an example of that, really trying for individuals to understand that, say the African descendant woman's experience as it relates to natural hair discrimination is very much related to, say, the Muslim woman's experience as it relates to discrimination on the basis of their hijab. And then thinking about sort of the double discrimination that individuals may suffer if they are both Muslim and African descendant who are wearing hijabs and natural hair, right? And so really trying to understand sort of the, getting people to understand the intersectional and commonalities as it relates to women of color, as well as, even the differences in experiences, but hopefully in light of those commonalities and differences that we can really be able to appreciate that when we're advancing civil rights laws that might protect, say, Black women, that at the same time, we're trying to protect individuals who may not necessarily occupy those or possess those particular identity characteristics. And lastly, in terms of diasporic, the work that I do definitely as it relates, just generally speaking, all the work, not even just grooming codes discrimination, but all the work is very much rooted in my, my expertise in comparative slavery and race relations law in the Americas and the Caribbean. So especially as it relates to, what is race and what is Blackness, really taking a critical look of what that means throughout the African diaspora, and also the forms of discrimination, especially as it relates to natural hair discrimination, really being able to illuminate that, again, this is just not an issue of African descendants in the United States, but around the world. And so there, again, in terms of this discrimination, there is that commonality and unfortunately a universality. And I think it's really important for individuals, especially who are not aware, or sort of or diminish or minimize, the systematic nature of it and its harms, to really be able to provide a global context to this kind of discrimination, among other forms of racial discrimination.
I think a lot of the work I do intersectionally is recognize all of the privileges I bring in the room as a man, a light-skinned man, the way I speak, with my name and everything else, that I am like perhaps the most comfortable Black person that in very like white dominated spaces to interact with, and realize that my presence alone is not enough, and that I always have to be an advocate, and realize how many times I fail at doing that. And really take a step back, shut up a lot of times, listen, just as we expect white allies to be. I've like really been looking at the discussion around Black Lives Matter, and there was a whole debate on when trans Black Lives Matter became a hashtag, realizing that I can be both a privileged and oppressed identity at the same time, and opening space for that, and creating work that challenges all of those intersections is like what I'm really just like curious about and what excites me in creating work. And diasporic, I think in the same way, is realizing that the Black American experience from Denver, Colorado is not the only one, and that there's so many new places to interact. Like, I'm going to New York, like the Bronx experience is going to be different than the Brooklyn experience versus the Harlem experience versus the Ethiopian or Nigerian experience. So it's just all learning and finding small ways to add that into the work.
I guess I'll go. I think I am in many conversations with a commitment to complexify the conversation. That based on what you just said, Kevin, it's my effort to get away from monolithic Blackness, to one-dimensionalize us as a people, and to say my Creoleness, my heritage informs my Blackness in completely different ways than someone who was maybe born and raised in Denver or in California or in Canada or in Barbados, and et cetera. And so I think when I show up in white spaces, I'm seen as a woman of color, and I understand that that's where I am advocating for Black people, for Black and brown people. And then suddenly when I'm in Black spaces, I'm getting tested. And frequently what has happened is that when I get a pass card, it's because people have seen me dance. And they're like, oh, that library of cultural information is in her body. And I'm trying to get us as a people to take on our dirty laundry and to get past that kind of pigmentocracy and colorism so that we stop questioning a hierarchy within Blackness. And so I'm interested in the many hats that I wear when I show up to spaces to say, how can intersectionality such as mine be in dialogue? I'm not asking for supremacy. I'm not asking for placement above and beyond anyone else's Blackness. I just simply want to be in equitable dialogue with my brothers and sisters and trans and non-binary colleagues all over the place. And so for me, it's about dimensionalizing our conversation of Blackness in a way that helps us to disintegrate our own internalized colonialism.
Yeah, I would just echo a lot of the identity things that Professor Mejia and Kevin said, being like light skin, mixed race. I show up in spaces and try and do my best to confront all pieces of supremacy and oppression. I'm anti-oppressionist, and that for me just means being committed to like a consistent journey of learning and learning more and learning more. Because I think a lot of times we get stagnant, but in a world so full of so many intersectional systems of oppression, it's so important that we stay in a learning space. My most recent experience with that is like, I'm trying to learn more about ableism and really understand like the ways that that shows up in every single, everyday life. Because that's not something that I've had to confront myself until recently. So yeah, I think it's just a learning journey for me.
Thank you all so much for what you have said thus far. You have touched on immense depth the issues regarding the Black community. We can honestly go on and on and on because there's so much complexity to these things that some people just don't understand. But while the Q&A questions are coming in, I'd like to ask you, what advice would you have given to yourself at the beginning of your career?
Just do it. Literally, like, literally. I never thought that I was going to get into photography. I actually have more of a background in dance and vocal music and marketing. And when I first was thinking about starting a company, I was more so getting like freelance clients. And then as I realized how much of the component of storytelling was just imperative, I picked up that camera, and it's been straightforward ever since. So I would literally tell little me, like, just do it. Who cares what anybody thinks? Like, I guess you could maybe think about the type of feedback you may receive, but who cares? Just do it, be happy in doing it, and just move forward. And so that's definitely what I would say.
I still feel like I'm at the beginning of my career, so I'm listening to everyone. I want to read like one little short thing that it's a quote that I love from Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde, whose birthday was yesterday. And this is something that I have been using at the beginning of my sort of career, I guess, to help myself continue forward. In becoming forcibly and essentially aware of my mortality and what I wished and wanted for my life, however short it may be, priorities and omissions became strongly etched in a merciless light. And what I most regretted were my silences. Of what had I been afraid? To question or to speak as I believed could have meant pain or death. but we all hurt in so many different ways all the time, and pain will either change or end. Death, on the other hand, is the final silence. And that may be coming quickly now, without regard for whether I had ever spoken what needed to be said, or had only betrayed myself into small silences, while I planned someday to speak, or waited for someone else's words. And I began to recognize a source of power within myself that comes from the knowledge that while it is most desirable not to be afraid, learning to put fear into a perspective gave me great strength. So I think that's like, yeah, just do it. Like Eboni said.
I'll just share something that I wrote. Thank you for this question. I didn't know this was going to be a question, but that I wrote a little while ago about a woman who means business. And I think for myself, I wish I had known maybe in the beginning. I mean, I've always been pretty driven, but what it really means to mean business in this world, that oftentimes don't perceive women as being business-like, or giving us the same kind of value as it relates to that. So for me, I would say, it's about the business of lifting others up as you climb. Be prepared to do that, be responsible to that. It's also about, charting your own course, to what Eboni and Katie have said, and pursuing your goals passionately and authentically. Also being driven by the unique purposes and goals placed inside of you, rather than comparing yourself to others and conforming to expectations that may be imposed upon you. I also remind myself that, to see life's challenges, even within your profession, especially, as opportunities. So instead of seeing them as, something that is not going to be a part of it, challenges are going to be there, and to see them as opportunities to cultivate personal growth and greater alignment with your purpose, rather than as failures. And then lastly, for me, as a woman who means business, that means for me to appreciate your worth, your value, and absolutely accept nothing less. And finally, a woman who means business is one that knows that she is unstoppable. So those are things that, had I known, 15 years ago, I would continuously remind myself throughout this journey.
And I'll just say quickly, be consistent and effusive of your praise for others. There are so many dope people doing work that you can look up to, seek out mentorship. And that's really the next big thing is going to be on the outside of your periphery. So the more you speak up for other people, the more you share how much you love what they do, the more you're going to have opportunities to do dope stuff.
Everybody can shine.
Oh, such wise words from all the other panelists. What I wish my younger self had known is how important my wellness practices would be, as the twists and turns of maturing would be. That everything from taking care of my gums and my teeth, to learning yoga, to learning breathing techniques and meditation techniques, those things got me through the rough patches in my career, as I hit everything from unexpected surgeries to relationship changes, or whatever it be. That to think that life won't give you bumps would be naive. And so that the wellness practices that you start young in life are the things that become your bridge to continuing what you love. So take your wellness, yes, your sleep and your hydration very seriously. For real, Kevin, that is so true. What panned out for me well, things that I started young, that money was never a measure for success. If you let the almighty dollar become your measure as to whether or not you've arrived in your art, you've let capitalism define your soul. Please don't let that happen. Please make sure that whether the money's flowing or not, there are always things you can do to constantly get better in your craft. whether it's studying what others do, whether it's reviewing your previous work, imagining new projects and taking notes so that you have an inspiration notebook. There is always something you can do that is not connected to money to get better at your craft. Something someone said to me that was very wise. If you're going to go into it for a profession, you have to love it enough to hate it, because it's going to piss you off once in a while. It's going to confuse you, confound you. You're going to hit bumps in the road that are going to really demoralize you. But if you can't wake up the next morning and fall back in love with it, then just keep it as recreation. Don't try and do it for profession. And there is no shame in recreation of doing what you love to fulfill yourself, right? If it keeps you balanced, if it keeps you nourished, ain't nothing wrong with that. So do you love it enough to hate it? If that's happened a couple times and you just keep waking up and saying, whew, I need to hit that again. I need to try this one more time. I'm not going to give up. If you're just geeking out at that level, then you're probably ready to do it as a profession. But hardcore isn't for everyone. Matter of fact, I remember I had some young friends early in the career who were like, I'm hardcore. I'm not doing anything but dance. And then they were always calling me up saying, can I come use your computer? Can I borrow your car? Because they couldn't meet some of their basic needs in order to further their careers. And I had a 9-to-5 job and I was part-timing on the dance thing. And I tell you what it came down to it, I actually had health insurance when I really needed it. That made a difference. And I'm not trying to say that those practicalities should rule over every single decision. I'm just saying, don't neglect your long-term plan and keep doing things that continue to build your personal stability in life. Under even COVID pandemic, do you really need more, pretty fashion in your closet, or can you take $5 and put it in your savings account? Just think about your long-term stability, and to not worry about success in terms of frequency. A poet is still a poet when they are washing dishes after dinner. So if you think that, I'm not getting gigs, or I'm not getting the kind of accolades that I want, the truth is, do it anyway. It's between you and your creator. Do it anyway. And as your love for it continues to pour out, you do magnetize a community to you of either fellow practitioners or possibly fans or possibly patrons, who knows. But to know that your well-being over the long run matters, include that in the formula and let your love for what you do continue to speak in all ways. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Unfortunately, we are down to our final question for today. And the Black joy, aesthetic, and magic push against the dominant narratives and representation. How do you share your joy and magic through your work? Please try to keep your answers about a minute. But if you got to express yourself, here's our platform. No one's going to judge you. Do what you got to do.
Just one, may I trouble you to repeat the question? I'm so sorry.
I know, I was saying, the more mature people, the seasoned people in the room, can you repeat that? I won't say old, we're not old.
The question is how do you share your joy and your magic throughout your work? Which I guess is really just to say, what keeps you passionate? What about this keeps you waking up and wanting to do this? What about this makes it what you love and what you're willing to continuously do, regardless of the adversities that you face throughout the world? I know that's a loaded question, but it's at the center of what you do, why you get up, why you wake up every morning, why you're willing to face the world.
I can definitely start. I guess what more so motivates me. I think sometimes the inspiration comes from the lack of seeing parts of myself in the media in a way that is mentally and visually intimate and vulnerable. Also, just the love for creating in general just inspires me on a daily. And more so recently, I think my father's transition last month has really provided me with the light I haven't touched before. And although it was unfortunate, and I still find joy and inspiration in knowing that I have this beautiful ancestor that holds so much value and strength over me throughout anything that I go through from here on moving forward. And so that's kind of what just keeps me going every day and keeps me live and active in my craft.
I'll hop in with swiftness. This kind of speaks also like what I would tell myself is, especially in theater, now that theaters are trying to become more social justice oriented, there are so many stories that are just sad as shit. Excuse me, but like there's a lot of struggle porn that's out there. And so I just really appreciate this question because it is about joy and I think like there's a lot of spiritual practice in being on the stage for me, and like that the commiseration between the performer and the audience. So all just like remembering the ritual that I'm a part of gives me this like extra level of power. And then the people, of course, like the homies are just beautiful souls, and being able to share that with someone is incredible. And then curiosity is a big thing too, is that there's just like, there's never been more stuff in the world of all different stripes and backgrounds. And so there's always just new things to find, to add into. Like I'm doing this circus show and they got me like spinning on this bar and stuff and like cool clothing and whatnot. That's just exciting. So I think like care and curiosity are two like pillars. And also then, like I'm talking about struggle, is divorcing yourself from the idea that you need to hustle to do this. Like you can really just be, the momentum can come from the love and joy of it. And when you're doing it, I feel that you find success more and then the money comes. So I just do a lot there, but this was my favorite question that I was waiting for. There's so much to express and find and fail at. Also, celebrating your failures because they're indicative of the effort. Like that's, I do with my classes, like fail church, and we just come in and give testimonials the last time that you like really busted your stuff. So a whole lot of stuff, but so much to celebrate. Thank y'all.
I can hop in. Condolences, Ebony. Love to you. Yeah, I'd say community. Like that's the thing that keeps me going. Like you all, spaces like this, especially like BIPOC queer folks like myself. It's just the critical connection, I think, is huge for me and like keeps me going. And humor. Like people can be in like the lowest place, especially like BIPOC folks and like Black folks too, like just really not going well, but like pull up in the barbershop and it's just like jokes. Like that keeps me going. That gives me joy. And like shit talking, that's just, it's fun. It's like, gotta do it. It's a love language. Yeah, and then just staying interested, because I think sometimes, especially in this like social media culture and this like outward exterior presentation kind of world that we live in, like we're so obsessed with being interesting. Like we want to appear as if we're interesting, but like the part of that is like good for the world and good for you is being interested, right? Like, and that's kind of what Kevin was saying. It's like, seek things out, like reading and writing and new experiences. And like, I'm hearing like Professor Mejia talking about dance stuff. I'm like, when can I go to a dance class? Like I'm trying to like move my body, starting new things. So yeah, I'd say those are my sources of joy.
Thank you all so much for your contributions to this conversation today. Am I missing anyone before we close out? By all means, take it away.
Am I the last one to go? Okay. I'm a long-term survivor of chronic illness, and I'm a long-term survivor of cancer. It is a blessing for me to be here. I know I'm supposed to be 6 feet under were it not for medical intervention and a lot of long nights and a lot of pain. Every day is a gift. And so for me, being able to experience my daughter who is on this call, Aja Mejia, I love you. To be able to witness her unfolding, to be able to meet new people, to explore new ideas is a gift that I cannot even begin to express appreciation for it. I feel it's inadequate. I don't have language that is adequate to say I'm still here. So if I'm gonna be here, oh damn, am I gonna gobble it up. Oh my goodness, am I gonna appreciate it? Oh my goodness, am I gonna let people know how much I love them and how beautiful I find them, how extraordinary they are to me. So please don't wait for a medical crisis to teach you how to fall in love with people in life. Gobble it up now.
Yeah, I have to echo Professor Mejia in that is that, you know, every single day, I just think of it as a blessing to be able to do what I do, to be able to educate others, to have the freedom to actually offer my voice, whether it be through, you know, spoken word or through writing, through teaching, that is a blessing that, you know, many of my ancestors did not have. And so I really do, you know, cherish that and think, you know, very critically about that, even on those days where it can be very challenging, you know, to be a social justice advocate, you know, trying to combat and confront, you know, very institutionalized norms that may not include us. And, you know, in particular, like white supremacy and the work that we're doing, it's hard work. It's hard work. But despite that, you know, I do think about the fact that, you know, I'm able to do it. And right now I'm able to do it from the comfortability of my home. and I have lights and I have heat and I have, you know, access to the internet. I mean, just to be really real, and I have food, you know, on the table to be able to do that. And I say that because, you know, oftentimes we think, you know, to Kevin's point, that you have to struggle in order to do good things in this world. You can do good and you can do well at the same time. And I really do think that as we are doing well, that it is incumbent upon us and our responsibility to do good, not just for ourselves, but to do good for other people. And so every single day I feel is a blessing to be able to positively impact at least one person's life. And my hope is that I can even do more of that and to be able to positively impact the world. And so I really do. Those are the things that keep me going every single day, is that just through this voice, just through this ability to communicate, you know, you absolutely can bring joy and goodness and change to someone else's life. And that's it for me. But this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. You guys, just being here is my joy today. Just being in conversation. I'm going to be skipping for the rest of the weekend.
Yeah, well, they're lovely thoughts to end on, the idea of sort of healing, the kind of idea of just everything we've heard today. So I really want to thank everybody. We're up against the hour and I just want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I'd like to thank our panelists for being here, our student facilitators and moderators, Jaswan, Suyan, Aja, everybody who's here making today a reality, everybody working on the back end on the logistics. Thank you, Sarah D. Anderson, you rock. We're so grateful for everyone's expertise and time. Our next teaching is in the works. It'll probably not going to happen for a few months, but you will be hearing more about that. We are going to be sending a survey to everybody too, based on today, because we want to do more of these and we want your opinions on sort of what we should be highlighting next. We also are going to update our DEI website, although Katie, I think I'm gonna start calling it EDI, or JEDI website, with a list of Black-owned businesses that we can all support, right? Particularly given the month we're all in. So thank you again for everybody. I don't know if anybody wants to have any last words before we sort of cut out for the day.
Thank you. See you, Denver.
Thank you, everybody. Sarah, are you there?
I'm here on the back end.
I know, but like you got to be the front end right now because you're making this happen. So I really want to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. This was amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right, everybody, without any further ado, I think we'll get the survey out to people who attended, and then keep a lookout for our website. We'll probably highlight that anyway in the next few weeks when we get that list updated, and we'll have lots of resources up there for everybody to, including everything that was happening. I'm going to save the chat today and try to see what we can pull out of that. Thank you again, everybody. Have a great day, and please take all the sort of joy and positivity that came out of this, as Professor Greene was saying, throughout the whole week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.